Well, welcome to another session of Bush Care Matters. Tonight we have a talk on ARBA, the Australian Association of Bush Regenerators, and we have the Secretary of ARBA, Jane Guy, here tonight to tell us all about ARBA if you don't already know about it. So please take it away, Jane. Welcome.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. I'll just fiddle around here. Am I on shared screen? I'm not on shared screen, am I?
So not yet.
I'll have to go have to go back, I think, to get that happening.
Jane, you were going to, before we started, you were saying it'd be nice to know a little bit about you.
Yeah. Me. Is that right? Have I got the...
Yeah, we're just halfway through the presentation, I think.
Yeah, hang on. I'll have to try and show. The slideshow. Okay, a little bit about me. I'm secretary of ARBA. I have been for a number of years. My background in Bush Regen. I joined ARBA in the mid-80s after I'd been working with the National Trust before I joined the National Trust, I joined as a Bush Regenerator. I did a National Trust course in Bush Regen before it even went to TAFE in 1982 with Robin Buchanan. And then I worked with National Trust under John Diamond. A lot of you would know John.
Yeah, John's a local.
He lived at Waverton, and he and his partner Georgina set up the Bush Regen company, Bush Habitat Restoration, which I think is still going strong. And John was a great mentor for me, and I really valued that experience with him. And then I did a lot of bush care training for a number of councils around Sydney and Central Coast. And yeah, that probably 10, 12 years or more, maybe. And then I decided that I'd like to spend more time working for ARBA because there were a lot of people who just didn't have the time to support ARBA, time poor, as you know, and poor generally, as Bush Regenerators are. So I thought I'd like to give it more time because the value of ARBA was just so great to me. It had this unique practice of looking after natural areas which no other organisation had. And I just hated the thought that this might just fade away. So yeah, so I've been working as secretary for quite a while now. I think I said to you originally probably at least 6 years, probably more like 8. But yeah, so the industry was getting overtaken by a lot of landscapers and, you know, the spray plant mulch sort of variety. And I just felt ARBA or Bush Regen wasn't getting enough attention. So that's sort of basically where I come from, I suppose. So I'll go back to I suppose I'm meant to give pay my respects to the traditional owners of this land, aren't I? So I'd like to pay respect to the people of the Garigal country where I live. I'm close to the beautiful Hawkesbury River, which is now called Deer Rubbin by some people, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I'm really inspired by the country around here and all natural areas, and at the moment the wildflowers around here are just gorgeous, and you know, there are platylobiums and gonfalobiums and eriostemons and baronias and whatever. And I had the delight of taking my grandchildren on a little bushwalk around here the other day, and they were picking out the waratahs, so that was quite exciting for them. And then there are quite a few middens around here. Everywhere you walk by the waterfront, you find middens, which reminds you of the people who used to look after this land not that long ago, really. A couple of things about Arbor that people might misunderstand. It's not a union by any means. We're certainly passionate about bush regeneration, but we're not a union for bush regenerators. We support bush regenerators, and whether they're paid or volunteer. And and we don't have any on-ground projects. That's another thing people sort of tend to think of Arbor as running bush regen programs or projects, but we don't. So Arbor is about supporting the bush. I'm not quite sure. There are probably other expressions. I was going to say we serve the bush, or the bush is our client. I'm not quite sure. There are probably better ways of expressing it than I can think of.
Jane, I always thought of it as it's a professional organisation, association. So like any profession, having a professional association where we do skills development.
Yes, I suppose, but it's not necessarily for people who earn a living from it. It's really about the bush. I think as teams, our erstwhile president said, the bush is our client. So yes, so we all our efforts are at making the bush better, if that makes sense. But yes, we are into professional development, I suppose. So anything that we feel will improve the outcomes of work on the ground in the bush. So I'd like to thank all those wonderful volunteers and dedicated council staff like you, Andrew, who work in the bush, because that's the way we're going to make it better. So I'll go on to the next slide. So going back to the beginnings of Arbor, and I presume you've all heard about the Bradley sisters, Joan and Eileen Bradley, who around in the 60s, they lived next to Ashton Park in Mossman, which was basically bushland, but terribly weedy, and got sick of the council coming in and slashing lantana, and then finding, 6 months, a year later, it was more lush than ever. And so they were conservationists and scientists. Joan was an industrial chemist, and so they were used to observation, close observation, and they worked on the bush in their own way, and then over time realised that they could actually get the bush to look after itself by removing the weeds and, basic principles like working from good to bad and things like that. So,
Jane, you're not screen sharing just yet.
Oh, I don't? Oh, okay, I'll have to go back then, because I'm sorry. I thought it's...
So the little green button on the bottom?
Yeah, I'll have to go back to Zoom. Hang on. I knew this mightn't... So, but I'm already in the Zoom. Hang on, how do I... Hang on.
So go to the menu bar at the bottom. There's a green button. It'll, when you roll over.
Yeah, I know. I've got to get back to... Here we go. Okay. There we go. All right. Now, I thought I'd done this before, but somehow or other...
That's right,
that's better, isn't it?
Yeah, it can be confusing if you've got the PowerPoint open and you're looking at it and you don't know whether it's in Zoom or not. Yeah.
So, that's better because I can see it at the top now. All righty. Yeah.
Look at Robin. She's so young.
She is, yes. How do I shrink this? Because you're probably seeing all this, aren't you? Ooh, how do I get rid of all you people?
Oh, I can do that. I'll do that. Don't worry. Oh, yeah.
No.
There we go.
Stop video. No, that's just...
You're right. I've got that.
Can you remove the people on the side or not?
Yes, I've done that.
Okay. So I can see it, but you can't. Is that right?
Right. Must be.
I thought I could.
Yeah, just go through the presentation. We can't see here.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Sorry.
Anyone else can just move that to the side anyway by themselves, I think.
All right.
Yeah.
So, all right, the Bradleys, yes, in the 1960s. So they worked out these principles of how to recover degraded bushland areas, and they got a huge following. Heaps of people who loved the bush around Sydney, you know, flocked to find out how to do this, and they had lots of followers. And then I think Lane Cove Council was the first council to pay bush regenerators to work on bushland, and then there was National Trust employed them on a HISMA in Beecroft, which is largely bushland, and Kringai Council and others followed. So there was this huge movement. And then in 1986, a group of people got together and registered Arbor. Now, I'd just like to read you this little bit from Janet Felly Cunningham. I asked her about the start of Arbor. She was one of the people around at that time who was following the Bradley sisters. She said, "I don't know if we had heard that dodgy work called bush regeneration was being advertised by some in the landscape business. Clearly there needed to be a representative group with a name that represented what we did. As I recall, some wanted to tie it down to the Bradley method people only, and I felt that not using the Bradley name would be an affront, and they felt, that not using the Bradley name would be an affront to Joan and Eileen, while others wanted to have an association that could grow to involve environmental bush regeneration in the wider sense, and that could reach state by state across Australia. I and a few others with a wider view for the future supported the latter. I'd come up with the Arbor acronym. The alternative was something like the Bradley Bush Regeneration Society. We were all concerned about the term bush regeneration and that it represents a standard of work and had solid aims. The temperature of the meeting rose and eventually a vote was taken and the Bradley people had the majority support. So the long and short of that was the group who supported the broader view of bush regen got a bit upset, and Janet, being Janet, stormed off the next morning, caught the early train into the city and registered Arbor with the offices of associations so that the other group couldn't get bush regen registered. So that was the very beginnings of Arbor in 1986. So then Robin Buchanan was an amazing woman who she started a bush regen course with the National Trust, as I said, which I actually did in 1982. And then she went to TAFE and developed a whole course of bush regen, which became quite famous and well supported. And out of that grew lots of good bush regenerators. And she wrote a book, the Bible on bush regeneration. And then in 1996, Teen McDonald was the first PhD in bush regeneration. So they were really exciting times and everyone felt really positive. You know, now at last we've got a way of looking after the bush and everyone will get on board. And then there were groups like started up on Lord Howe Island. I don't know whether any of you have been to Lord Howe Island or not, but that's been going for over 20 years and they've transformed this World Heritage Island from being almost destroyed by weeds, especially ground and climbing asparagus. But over the years and with some lots of good work by Sue and Hank Bauer, who are bush regenerators, and they run the program for the Lord Howe Island board. And they've got huge grants, like $1 million to bring specialised helicopters over to the island to spray the inaccessible weeds on top of Mount Gower. So, you know, it really was a big movement and people were really excited. And so that's sort of the start of Arbor, those times. One thing I was going to sort of clarify about herbicides. I know a lot of people sort of think the Bradley method doesn't use herbicides, but Joan Bradley was an industrial chemist and in her book I was looking at, she said, well, if someone comes to me with 5 years worth of data to show me that there's a herbicide that will work, I'll seriously look at it. And there was another bit I read that actually said she'd tried arsenic. So so they're certainly not anti-herbicide, but herbicide is a big issue. And if you go to Arbor's Regen TV, you'll see a video we have that discusses that issue. So I'll move on to the next. So yes, that's Robin Buchanan, and that's Joan Bradley, and there are a few others there. That's John Stockard. He was well known up the North Coast and caused a bit of conflict. And
yeah, John's important in the story of herbicide coming into broader use.
Sure is, yes. And there were caused a lot of distress at the time, but I think now people realise he was onto the right idea. And yeah, but yes, anyway, well, these sort of new ideas have to go through these sort of discussions and conflicts, I suppose. So Arbor's purpose. Arbor has had a few constitutions over the years, and this is our latest one, which we adopted at the last AGM. We have now been registered as a charity, and so this reflects that in a way, but we haven't yet got deductible gift recipient status. We're still awaiting that, but this is in anticipation of that, where it's just a bit of a process. So this is Arbor's purpose: to protect and enhance the natural environment of Australia by promoting, developing and fostering the ecologically sound management and repair of ecosystems. So it doesn't actually say bush regeneration, but Arbor supports and promotes ecological restoration more broadly, but is committed especially to promoting the pivotal role played by natural regeneration in the broader practice of ecological restoration. And we define bush regeneration as an Australian term for a form of ecological restoration involving a range of treatments that triggers the regeneration of local native species, as we all know, and fire, of course, is just one of those important treatments. So bush regeneration is a term I love, and I hope it will stay, but it is now seems that in the wider world of wisdom or whatever, the term assisted or facilitated natural regeneration is one that is being used. So
we're about 5 to 7 at the moment.
Okay, so do you want? Yeah, alrighty. I think we'll fly through this. So these are our objectives as stated by our constitution. So we're into advocacy, education, and promoting and facilitating appropriate training. The public fund will get established when we get our DGR status. So who is Arbor? So just to give you a bit of a picture of who we are, we're about 1,000 members, including 270 accredited bush regenerators, of whom you are one, Andrew.
Yeah.
And a lot more get an e-bulletin, but they don't get the newsletter, but we're hoping they might like it and join up and support us. Members can, basically anyone who loves the bush and wants the bush managed to be a healthy home for Australia's unique biodiversity into the future. And individual members, bush regenerators, bush care, land care volunteers, natural resource managers, nursery managers, ecologists, anyone who loves the bush and wants to see it well looked after. Group members, yes, councils, groups, Invasive Species Council, land care, bush care groups, Barrier Field Naturalist Club, which I'll mention a bit further on about in Broken Hill. And our pioneer bush regenerators, that was something Teen, our erstwhile president, instituted for those early bush regenerators who had really sort of formed the foundation of Arbor, and so they were given pioneer status at our 30th anniversary. We have a wonderful exec officer, Suzanne Pritchard, another initiative of teen. She managed to sort of work our finances somehow so we could pay Suzanne for a few hours, or I think she gets paid 12 hours a week, but does heaps more. So she's been wonderful. And Louise Brodie is our membership officer and has a huge amount of history of everybody, where they are, and whoops, yes. And we have a newsletter editor. Well, she's the newsletter editor. And Peter Dixon is our current president, and he was president some years back. We're a member organisation of New South Wales Nature Conservation, and hopefully that might, we might do likewise in other states when we get bigger. So Arbor is now a national organisation. It did, I keep pressing this and it goes to the next slide, sorry. It was originally just a New South Wales organisation and mostly supported by Sydney people, but now we have a board of 10 people nationally, covering South Australia, Queensland. We've got people from all up the coast of New South Wales. Teen is now in Cooma, so she's still on the board, and I'm the only one left in Sydney.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I know, it's amazing, isn't it? We start off in Sydney, and then there are no other board members except me in Sydney.
And Jane, if people didn't hear you before, the reason that it has been New South Wales or Sydney centric is because it started here.
Yep, that's right.
It started here on the lower North Shore.
Yep, yes, it did. Certainly, it was all around, the lower North Shore, Hornsby, Lane Cove, North Sydney, Mossman. And mainly on the north side of the harbour, I think. Yeah.
And it's interesting to see the spread, isn't it? Like, I did that land care conference recently, and some people from Western Australia, they knew all about the Bradleys, and they were practicing their techniques in the desert in Western Australia.
Right, yeah. Well, we did actually have an Arbor WA at one stage, quite a number of years ago, and for some reason it folded. I think the mining industry sort of came in, and all the big landscape people sort of dominated, and like here in Sydney, it was hard to keep, people to keep it going with limited resources. So yeah, hopefully one day we'll have another one in WA. We've got one in Victoria, as I've got here, and it started a couple of years ago, but we can't get it fully operational because we can't get the accreditation scheme going because of COVID. We need to train up assessors, and because of COVID, obviously that hasn't happened, but they're very keen, and they don't really have the bush regen tradition that we have here. So,
and what's the assessment about? What's this assessing that you're talking about, accreditation?
Well, accreditation, and I'll go on to here. What do we got? So that's accreditation is basically what started Arbor. People wanted an organisation that had standards. So initially, for quite a number of years, to join Arbor, you had to have a certificate in bush regen and so many. I think at that stage was only 200 hours practical experience under another bush regenerator who was experienced. Now, we've upped the standard more, and anybody can join Arbor, but accreditation is a separate thing, but only available to members. And we have assessors who assess each applicant for accreditation. Some are straightforward and can basically get accreditation based on what they produce on paper. If we know their supervisors, because that's a critical part of it. And you probably realise, Andrew, too, when you were doing it, that it's the people you work with who are important in terms of giving you the skills you need to be a good bush regenerator. It's a bit like an apprenticeship, I think.
Yeah.
So that's really critical to getting accreditation, to have that on-ground experience with someone who's of industry standard.
Yeah. I mean,
So
I trained with, I actually worked at I did my traineeship, for want of a better word, with the National Trust. So I was doing that for a good couple of years under, learning.
Yeah, well, that's like me with John Diamond, and you know, that was invaluable for me, really. So that mentoring aspect is really important. So depending on who your supervisors are and whatever, you may just get accreditation quite easily. Otherwise, we may need to come out and do a field assessment on a site of your choosing. So obviously that's a sort of logistical exercise, and certainly with COVID we haven't been doing any. So at the moment we're only doing what we call standard accreditation applications.
Jane, do you know, have volunteers, are there any accredited volunteers?
Heaps. Yeah. Oh, you don't have to be working, in a paid role as a bush regenerator to get accreditation. I mean, in the past, most bush regenerators were probably volunteers and they had accreditation. So we encourage everybody, it's sort of a nice thing to achieve, whether you're working or whether you're volunteering, I think.
So would, say for instance, would there be a scenario where one of the supervisors here could assess someone to get accreditation?
They have to apply to ARBA to be an assessor.
Right.
So we have assessors in different regions. I've mentioned here the limitation of accreditation, because the number of people who are working as bush regenerators is fairly limited. So, and the courses, particularly in rural and regional areas, are almost non-existent that would be to the standard that ARBA would require. There are a lot of conservation courses, but they don't actually teach the sort of thing that they teach at Ride TAFE and other TAFEs, where bush regen is regarded as sort of high quality.
Yeah.
So
I'll just let you know it's just past 7.
Okay, when do you want me to finish?
With 7:30 we'll wrap up, but
okay.
Just as a guide.
So I'll just read this a bit. So we'd like to see more competent bush regenerators get accredited to raise the standard and standing of bush regenerators, because contracts tend to go to the lower price, not necessarily the best practitioners who may deliver better outcomes that are more economical and more biodiverse in the long term. One of the major problems we have is that many of the people who give out the contracts don't really understand bush regen.
Jane, I'm thinking we probably, so when Gareth, he manages a contract for us, everyone, so Gareth would be looking at the different private contractors, and I assume that he would be considering this, whether they have accreditation, that sort of thing.
In fact, North Sydney is one of only 2 councils I know at the moment anyway that require or prefer ARBA accreditation to get onto their preferred contractor list.
I see.
So the other one is the Gold Coast City Council in Queensland. So but we are trying to get other councils to realise this. The benefit of having ARBA accreditation, because that way, even if they don't understand bush regen, they can get some sort of security that people they employ with ARBA accreditation will do a reasonably good job.
Yeah, true.
Someone straight out of TAFE with a Cert 3 and says they can do bush regen, or yes.
And you know, an important point there, Jane, is like, particularly when a lot of this bush regen was starting, the people responsible for managing bushland, they didn't know how to manage the bushland, and they only wish they did.
Yes.
So this is where this kind of comes in. So you can just imagine, like you're saying, if you're in some area that doesn't already have bush regeneration, but people are concerned, they want to manage it. You're manager responsible. You can see if companies have this accreditation to be assured that they're going to do the right thing for you.
That's right. And, you know, like I was saying there, you know, managers get feedback from the public that, you know, there are weeds, so they want someone to get rid of the weeds. So they go in and they spray it and they maybe stick a few plants in and walk away. Well, yeah, we all know that long term, that's not the best way to manage natural areas. So, you know, ARBA's about a practice that will give long-term benefits both for biodiversity and have economic benefits, in the sense that you won't have to keep spraying, and you will, it will be more efficient and economical in the long term. But it's hard to convince people of that quite often if they don't understand how it works. And our accreditation scheme is probably the only one in the world for practitioners. The Society for Ecological Restoration, the international organisation for ecological restoration, has an accreditation scheme or something like it, but it's not for practitioners. It's not for people actually working on the ground. It's more for the planners and the higher echelons, or whatever you like to call them, who draw up the plans but don't actually get their hands dirty. So any other questions about accreditation before I sort of just, no? Have we got any other accredited bush regenerators? No? Okay. So Regen TV is one of our educational methods on our website, and it's also on YouTube. We had a lot of videos taken at conferences and field days, but we didn't have the funds to do anything with them, so we just had all the raw materials, but to actually get it up into film and on screen is quite an expensive exercise with editing and whatever. So we applied for an environmental trust grant. I think we got something like $40,000, and so that really gave us a good starting point to get a lot of this stuff up onto onto our website, and it's also on YouTube. And there are some great things there that you can look at on all sorts of topics, really broad range. There are conferences, there are field trips that I'm sure you'll find something that would interest you. Yeah. And
I hope I'm not stealing your thunder, Jane, but I'd really like everyone to watch Renewal in the Desert.
Yeah, well, that's this one here. And yes, I was going to talk, that's probably my favorite. That opens up a whole new aspect of natural regeneration that I didn't even know about. This is a story based in the 30s in Broken Hill, and it's probably the first natural regeneration project in the world.
In the world.
Yeah. There might be a couple of others but yeah, we don't really know. But this is certainly well documented and well accepted as probably the first, I think. And
so the Bradleys are the second.
Well, that's right. Yeah, but they were in Sydney, you know, and
that's right.
And there was lots of bushland. This is out in the desert, and you know, just a few scruffy old plants, and that people don't really have such an affection for. But there was one person, Albert Morris, who worked for the electrolytic zinc company, the forerunner of BHP at Broken Hill, and he and his wife were passionate about the natural environment there, and they became sort of amateur botanists and knew all the plants. They grew plants, but because of the mining over the years, the area around Broken Hill had become a desert, literally a desert. You know, all the trees or any vegetation had been removed either for fuel, because they didn't have electricity then, I presume. I think it was just fuel stoves, and then mining props and whatever were needed, and grazing animals, domestic animals were put out for milk, you know, dairy cows and whatever. So the whole area became a dust bowl, and they had these terrible sandstorms that just covered houses and interfered with the mining equipment. And anyway, Albert and Margaret campaigned to have, I think, half a mile or a mile around Broken Hill fenced off and rabbit proofed, and all domestic stock removed. And they were able to convince the mining company and the council, presumably, that this would work, even though the botanist at Sydney Uni told them that, no, it wouldn't work. If you start with nothing, you'll end with nothing. And now, if you go to Broken Hill, you'll see these amazing regen reserves that protect the city right now. And that was natural regeneration. They did do some sort of planting, sort of experimental, but pretty well the whole area has regenerated naturally. So that's a really great story, and I really think you should watch that video. It's only 12, 15 minutes long, I think. So, and Virginia Bear, our wonderful videographer, has done it, and she puts her heart and soul into these things, and it's built around the story of the Barrier Field Naturalist Club, which was celebrating its 100 years last year. And I actually went and saw their exhibition in Broken Hill before the latest lockdown. And so they've celebrated 100 years. So it's pretty amazing. And Albert and Margaret Morris were one of the stalwarts of that. So these are, when the fires of 2019-20 hit, Arbor sort of thought, well, what can we do? We knew this was a great opportunity, despite all the disaster. It was a great opportunity to get in there and try and deal with some of these degraded edges. And because not only did the fire remove the weeds in a flash, it also stimulated regeneration. So it was the perfect opportunity to get in there and do something. And we put in a huge amount of effort trying to talk to federal government and some of these other big organisations like Greening Australia and WWF, Conservation Volunteers Australia, I think. But none of them are into natural regeneration. You know, it's all about planting, and we were trying to get our message through, but it's very hard as a little organisation to be heard. And lots of money was splashed around, but we didn't get anything. And so we decided, well, we'll try and do some workshops, and we did these videos. We're scrounging around for the money. LLS came to the party on a couple of them, which was really good. So that helped a bit. And some of our bush regen contractors supported them. So we came up with these, what we call FAB videos, first aid for burned bushland. So if you look on our Arbor website, or even just put FAB videos into Google, they're on our website, and they're also on YouTube. And I'm hoping to be able to give you a taste of this one. I won't play it for very long because I know...
Well, we've got 15 minutes.
Post-fire bush regen can create a lot of weed waste. How can you minimise time and effort spent managing it? A good approach is to leave it in place wherever possible. But might it regrow? Different plant species and plants at different life stages have different regrowth capacity. Sometimes the seeds are the biggest problem. Or there might be other growing parts, such as bulbs, runners, or tubers. The climate or season can make a big difference. In the tropics, a wider range of plants are likely to survive. For example, you don't want to leave cut privet stems on the ground in a warm, wet climate because they can sprout roots. But in drier conditions, you might get away with it. This is where some local knowledge can really help. Often, you can just leave the weeds where they were growing. This will ultimately add to the organic matter across the site. If the weed biomass looks like it will smother natives or confuse the weeding process, consider placing it in small piles. Weed piles can also create habitat, say for lizards and insects. This is especially important where the fire has burnt up all the woody debris and leaf litter. If the weeds could regrow, keep them off the ground. On rocks or logs, hanging in other plants, try rafting. Place the risky weeds on top of material that won't regrow. This can help provide more of that important three-dimensional structure to support fauna. But watch that the piles themselves don't become a weed source. A key goal of bush regeneration after fire is to stop the weed seed recharging the soil seed bank. Try not to include weed seed in the piles. Ideally, treat the weed before it seeds. If it already has, you could carry a bag or a bin to contain the seed until you can dispose of it.
So I think of them as like a little kind of Christmas tree shape, and just cut through with my hand saw and straight into the bag to capture the seed. And because it's got berries, bag it.
Take care with any other plant parts that can grow or reproduce. The stems and leaves of Madeira vine or wandering trad can easily root if left on the ground. For plants in the daisy family, separate flowers and buds from the plant if pulling it out by the roots.
I tend to take the flowers off these things. They will set seed even once you've hand pulled them.
Because if the flowers have been pollinated, they can progress to fruiting stage using the energy stored in the roots, even if pulled out of the ground. But it does depend on your overall strategy. Sometimes piling or concentrating weeds on site might be the most efficient use of limited weeding resources. And there are ways to manage the risk. Some propagules will compost if you cover them with plenty of other weed material. Small piles of propagules can be occasionally turned over to dry out the weeds at the bottom.
So maybe I'll go on to the next one.
Regrowth will generally be concentrated.
Yeah, whereabouts.
Okay. Is that okay?
So it's a great resource, everyone,
Fantastic,
that Regen TV. Yeah, some really good videos there, and it's exactly what we do, you know.
Yeah. Yep, I think, you know, people will find something that they'll be interested in watching, and they're all, you know, good quality videos, and so hope you'll sort of have a look at it.
Can I mention,
yeah, for sure.
Can I mention one thing there, Jane, is the so in response to the fires in 2019-2020, along with those videos, Arbor also was matching up.
Yes, thank you.
Is this in your presentation at all?
Yes, it was, except I skipped.
All right. So I'll just quickly say this. So Arbor was matching up volunteers with areas in need of weeding in response to the fires. So if you remember that story that I had in our newsletter about the bushland team going up to Barrington Tops,
yeah,
that came about with the assistance of Arbor. So they were so unlike so they were really filling that gap, and where, you know, just like that presentation last week on the response to wildlife recovery, the government really wasn't focused on the environment. You know, and it took volunteer organisations and associations like these to try to take some measures to help.
Yes, thanks for that, Andrew. That's definitely an important point, and one Arbor got so frustrated with, because there just was no coordination. There was obviously no strategy for dealing with this situation. So hopefully one of the outcomes might be, if they come up with some plan of how to deal with this in the future, that will be a part of it, because it was very poorly handled. And
yeah,
as you say, it fell on volunteer groups like ours to, you know, try and somehow get something happening. But then, of course, we got that happening, and then COVID hit. And like all the bush care groups, we all had to stop work. So it was, but yeah, so we've missed a big opportunity really in terms of the fires.
I think about 5 more minutes presentation, and then 5 minutes for questions.
So just what else? We've got newsletters, which are really good quality newsletters and for some excellent stories on a wide range of subjects. Our tick review is quite popular, or very popular, particularly in tick season. It's something we keep up to date with, the latest, any new information that comes in. We've got a chemicals in the management of biodiversity working group. That was the glyphosate working group, but it got renamed. And there's as I said before, there's a good video by the Bellingen Shire Council on managing weeds under the pressure of no herbicide, and yeah. And our walks and talks, well, the walks have obviously stopped. Talks, yes, we're still planning more, and if you remember, you'll get notification of those. We have an education and training subcommittee, and they put a huge amount of effort in year before last into a review of the national curriculum for training conservation and land management, and it's now called conservation and ecosystem management. So that meant we could, by being on these sort of important national committees or whatever, we can actually get outcomes that work for us, that give us quality training that means that people are better prepared for working in bush regen and the ecological restoration. Before they, the course that Robin Buchanan had at Rye TAFE, it all got changed and became these national training packages, and it was watered down significantly. And so we've been struggling since then really to get a training system that works for us, that comes somewhere close to what we had before. So a lot of work was put into that, because there were meetings in Canberra and Northern Territory and all over the place. So people gave up their time to contribute. We have technical experts on the Environmental Trust grants sometimes. Jen Ford is on a federal committee for industry, and alongside the horticulture and agriculture industry, so she has a voice there. I'm on the NCC's Bushfire Advisory Committee and the New South Wales Roadside Environment Committee. We advocate government to put in submissions, and the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration, we're in a consortium with a number of other groups, so we're hoping to come up with some good projects for that to promote ecosystem restoration. I don't know whether you're aware of that, but that's a really good thing. We're hoping.
This is great, this little graph, graph here, yeah.
Well, this was something that Teen McDonald worked really hard on and got happening a few years ago, and we got the first set of standards for ecological restoration practice in Australia, and the international group took it on too with a few changes. But So that was launched a few years ago, and we're now up to the, I think, edition 2.2, and it was officially launched a couple of weeks ago by Suzanne Lee, the Federal Environment Minister. And that's in conjunction with 12 environmental NGOs that has got that happening. So they've reviewed, this is their sort of latest diagram of the process, or the progression of ecological restoration. So you have, like on the left-hand green end, you have the natural, spontaneous natural regeneration, then this facilitated regeneration, which is
us.
it's us, what we call bush regen. So that now is definitely separate from any planting. So if you do planting, you're doing reconstruction. Bush regen does not include planting anymore. Some people sort of think, well, there's a bit of an overlap. Well, you can have a mix, obviously, but then this is all in academic sort of stuff, definitions.
If I could give an example, in the combined reintroduction, so that's Cremorne Point, really degraded areas where we're having to plant in. So the plants that Claire and the volunteers are producing at the nursery, the plants of provenance, we're planting them in there. That's where this sits.
Yeah,
There's facilitated regens in most of our other reserves. And unfortunately, we don't really have much natural regeneration because of all the urbanisation around here.
You've got to say it's pretty amazing around Sydney what we've got, haven't you? It's just incredible that we've got all this bushland, and obviously it's going to be degraded.
And that reconstruction, that's that sandstone crush gardens that we create, say at Primrose Park on the corner of Grasmere, or maybe along Balls Head Road on the approach to the coal loader. We're fabricating an environment from scratch.
Yeah, terrific. The recovery wheel is a sort of an aid to make it easier to see visually the progress of a site. So it has all the different aspects of an ecosystem in here, and it's scaled from 1 to 5. So as your work progresses over the years, you should see this gradually fill in an ideal world. But we're hoping this will become a tool that can become fairly universal, so that it can be compared from one place to another. I mean, it's not going to, obviously there will be differences on how individuals use it, and the more it's used, hopefully the more it can be standardized between people who use it. But so this is all part of the national standards, and it's all online. You can have a look. But so we're hoping that will be a good tool for improving the standards. It's not so much for what we do as bush regenerators, it's more for the larger scale projects that don't have that sort of background. So we're trying to make sure that there's a set of principles, and this has 6 principles, one of which is that there's a reference ecosystem. So that's probably the most important thing, that you have a reference ecosystem that you compared it, or you aim for.
If I could demonstrate, give you specific examples, everyone. So that means I don't know if there's any adopter plot people here, but we will, when we say around Cremorne Point where we're doing re-veg, or we're doing some regen re-veg, we are referencing the nearest remnant, and we're trying to reconstruct a simplified version of that. And our management plans will be based on the vegetation community that's identified in the natural area survey that ecologists do for us every decade or so.
Great.
Yeah. I think we're pretty much run out of time.
Jane. Okay. Well, I'll just quickly, here are some about, this is an old favourite, the 3 R's. I think, hope that's on the website. There's things, posters you can print off. Benefits of joining ARBA, the only organisation that represents and advocates for bush regen. A little bit goes a long way. So we rely on membership fees and volunteers. As I was saying before, you could showcase your bush care site or the whole council program and become part of Regen TV. So,
Do you want to do that, guys?
yeah, that'd be great.
Who wants to be in it? Come on, Anne, you can do it. You too, Rob.
So,
yeah.
there we go. So if you can think of or consider joining Arbor, we'd really love it, because the more people we have, the more clout we've got to influence governments and whatever. It's $35 a year to be a member, or $20 for concession for seniors, I presume. And any student gets it for nothing. So, and if anybody's good at social media, we'd love some help there. Even if it's only a little bit, you don't have to commit for any length of time or anything like that. And obviously, from what you've seen tonight, we do need people to help us with PowerPoints and presentations. Or you could write an article for the newsletter. So
after you write a new article for my newsletter.
Okay. It sounds
okay. Do we have any?
The same in both.
yeah. Do we have any questions?
Nope.
No, it's fantastic. Thank you very much for that. That was.
Have you heard about Arbor?
No, I haven't, and I'll be joining tomorrow.
Oh, lovely. That's great. Well, just yeah.
I put the link in the chat, so just click on
yeah.
that link and it'll come up in your browser.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful, because we do. I think we've achieved quite a lot over the years since 1986, but we've got a lot to achieve. We've got all of Australia's remnant bushland to fix up. So
there's a lot of work to do in the.
There's a lot of work to do, and we need to make sure it's done well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Terrific. Oh, thanks everybody, and thanks for inviting me.
Well, Jane, thanks so much for coming along. And would you mind stop screen sharing now?
Yep.
Just so we can just see you. Say goodbye properly.
And I've got to put my video on, I think, don't I?
Oh, your video's off now, is it?
Yeah. With my.
Oh, there you are.
My lockdown.
Well, thanks so much, Jane.
All right.
Yeah.
Hope you get home in time.
Yeah, I've just started a new choreo bachata tonight. It starts at 8, so I've got to fly.
Okay, thanks, Sandra. I really appreciate you asking us to talk about Arbor.
No worries, Jane. We'll speak again soon.
Okay, thanks everybody.
Bye everyone. Good night.
Good night.